Rebecca, so I'm glad we're
Hey.
doing this book. So yeah, amazing. We're beginning at the end and ending at the beginning. So why, what, why is presenting important? I guess that's a pretty broad question. Why is presenting important?
Yeah. Well, presenting is important because it's like your interface with the world. It's how you share ideas with the world. So you can think about presenting in a lot of different ways. You can think of it as like super high level, like I'm going to do a TED talk. You're going to rehearse forever and work with people and get a new suit and then go on a stage. Like that's one level of presenting. But another level of presenting is, for example, last night I went to a dinner party and I stood up at the table and presented gratitude to the host for inviting 20 of us into his house and making an amazing dinner. So that's also presenting. It's your way of standing in front of a group of people and sharing what's going on inside your heart. So presenting is important because without that, people are just guessing at what you think. It's your way of communicating with the world. It's your way of sharing what's going on inside of you with the world.
Okay. And so I remember us talking at one point about presenting being a way of participating in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are obviously we can be active or passive agents in our life. We can create a business and create something and do that, or we can be in a job and receive work from someone else and do that work, and both are totally fine. But they're just different ways of interacting, and I would make an analogy that presenting is more of the you're creating this thing to offer to the world versus being given something. So being given something is essentially the analogy of being an audience member. So you're receiving content from someone else to take in. And that's fine too. But if you want to be a creator, if you want to participate in the world, and again, it's not for everybody, and I'm not saying that you have to do that, then presenting is a vehicle for doing that. Presenting is a vehicle for being a creator with your thoughts and sharing them with the larger world.
There's also this concept of making sure that your thoughts land, like
Mhm.
presenting your thoughts. Tell me about that, about making sure that your thoughts land somewhere. It's something
Mm.
you've mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I often use the George Bernard Shaw quote, "The greatest problem with communication is the illusion it has taken place." And I see this a lot with people I work with. They spend a lot of time crafting what they're going to say, and then either in their delivery or in their lack of being able to connect with the audience before they deliver their thoughts, something breaks down, and then the audience doesn't receive the message, which is a shame because you did all this work trying to craft the message, and so if the audience doesn't get it's like a waste of time, right? So making sure your thoughts land, it's essentially, it's like electricity, right? Like if it starts over here, if it doesn't get over here, then there's no charge, like the light doesn't turn on. So understanding how to land your thoughts, whether that be with clear thinking and logic and pathos or storytelling, like how are you going to make sure that your thoughts actually make it to the other side? And there are a lot of strategies for that and formulas, um, and it's something that you have to care about. Like you actually have to care that your audience gets it, because if you don't care, then they won't get it. Like I'm actually working with the client right now, and she's really brilliant. She works in the tech industry at a very well-known company, and she wanted to work together because she's like, oh God, people constantly are telling me that they don't get it, like what I'm saying. And she was worried about her job, like worried about getting fired because she wasn't able to communicate her thoughts clearly. And one of the things I'm noticing is that her thinking and her logic it's great, but it's like this much higher than her audience. And so her audience is just like, what are you talking about? It's almost like she's too smart for her audience. And so I'm teaching her how to care a little bit, like to like, okay, like let's bring it down. Like, can you show more empathy? And, I was noticing that she was getting upset because her audience wasn't getting it. And I was like, yeah, but that's your problem. Like, this is the problem that you need to solve. So, yeah, a lot of times it's about empathy and like, how can I make sure my audience gets it?
So there's kind of a self-growth layer to all of this, a psychological layer. It's like empathy, making sure people understand you. Can you speak to that? It's like the self-growth around this, because she's obviously going to grow as a person, not just in the business world, but also with her friendships and her, intimate relationships, and so on.
Yeah, for sure. So I never really saw it this way until a client said it to me like this. And he said, "Oh, I find it really interesting what you do, because essentially communication is personality. Like it's how you show up in the world." And he's like, "You're essentially coaching people on personality." And I was like, "Oh, I guess you're right." Like, I would have never said that, or I would have never come to that on my own. But in a way, that's true. And when you think about what personality is, it's the way that you bring all of your experiences and way of thinking, and thoughts and feelings and like history to the world, and how you bring that into an expression. And yeah, again, like if that expression is not being received well or received at all, then the onus is on you, the communicator, to make some adjustments so that it does land. I mean, if you care about it. If, of course, there are plenty of people out there who are like, I don't give a fuck, and that's fine too. It's all in what you're trying to achieve. But yeah, working on the aspects of presentation skills, communication skills, like what you're saying, empathy, for example. This is all part of leadership communication skills. That is, at the end of the day, it's personality. Like, how are you showing up as a listener rather than a speaker first? How are you demonstrating, like, how are you using clarifying questions so that your audience feels heard, for example, all of these things.
Right.
How are you showing your humanity by telling a story so that your audience is moved emotionally?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And how are you digging in, and clarifying your ideas for people? I no doubt will discover things about your ideas that you didn't know before, right? You'll be digging in, and
yeah.
Yeah,
100%. And I don't know if I've said this before in our conversations, but one of the exercises I do with people is called peeling the onion. And it's a pairs exercise that I get people to do to help them clarify their ideas. So oftentimes, most people do this. They get a task to do a presentation for work or do a TED Talk or whatever, and they'll sit down and they just start writing. And they just go, blah, 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 and then a lot of people are like, hey, I'm done. And, or, a lot of people will edit it for a while. But one of the things I don't see people doing enough is workshopping it with somebody else, even before they hit the paper, because once it hits the paper, it kind of calcifies a little bit because people are hesitant to delete things or take away, right? Like, we all have documents that are full of ideas that we never used, or that we used and then people didn't listen because we were talking too much. But this peeling the onion exercise is literally, it's working with someone before you start writing anything down. And it's the simple exercise of like, I'm going to do a talk about X. And the other person, their whole job is just to say why. Oh, really? Why? Oh, well, because I believe that X is important. Oh, well, why do you believe that? Oh, because da, da, da. And then you just keep going deeper and deeper until you there's nothing left to say. And then that you're at the root of like the essence of your message. And most people, when they start writing their content down, they're like way up here. And then over time, like working with a coach, they generally go like 3, 4, 5 levels deeper, and it's way more interesting and compelling. So yeah, this idea of bringing your ideas to an audience, whether it's just for a talk or whether it's, for example, a business, I'll use that idea again. It helps you refine it because people are naturally going to say like, well, what do you mean? Or tell me more about that, or why, or, it's that's part of being a human, is just like going deeper in meaning with each other.
Right. So you'll be understood more by working on your presentation skills.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I should ask you, why you, Rebecca? Why am I interviewing Rebecca about presenting, and why, and what makes you this presentation coach, this expert in presentation? Why?
Well, I I guess it started with my dad. My dad was an opera director, and we lived all over the world when I was a kid, and he often kind of tapped me for non-speaking roles, right? So he would be like, "Oh, we need a child for Così fan tutte. Rebecca, get over here." And so then I would get on the stage and do my thing, and I wouldn't sing, but I would do all the acting, and I loved it. I loved being on stage, and I loved the feeling of getting a rise out of the audience. Like, I specifically remember being on stage for Così fan tutte, and there was this one little like action that my dad had choreographed me to do, and it was really cute, and I remember doing it, and I got the audience to laugh, and I was like, oh, like it just made me feel powerful. And so I've always been attracted to the stage. And then when I graduated college, I've always been curious about foreign cultures and languages and different people. And so I took a job in Japan teaching English as a second language. And I taught in the local schools, like high schools and junior high and elementary schools. And so I was helping people express themselves in English. And that was really challenging and fun. And it just taught me a lot about how, like, even in a foreign language, there's so much that you can understand, even when you don't understand the language, just by gestures and context, but it takes work. Like, it takes work to have that interaction with someone. And for me, I always love that. I love traveling. I love not speaking the language and trying to figure out, like, what are they trying to say? Like, I've always just taken a lot of inspiration out of that for some reason. And then that moment of connection, the moment of like, oh, I get it. And then, everybody has a laugh. Like, there's just something about that I really love. And so when I came back from teaching English for many years, I taught in a lot of different countries: Japan, Nepal, Australia. They speak English in Australia, but I taught Saudis and Chinese people who had moved there. So I moved back to the US, and I continued to teach English for a while, but I was just, after a while, it just got boring. I was like, I don't want to teach grammar anymore. And so I started doing kind of consulting work, doing copywriting for tech companies and instructional design. And then it didn't, I'll tell you the story. I met this guy who was he had started a startup, and he was doing emotional intelligence training for tech companies. Like, it was like HR type talent development stuff. And I can't remember how I met him, but he was like, I know. Yeah.
Totally.
I know. And but we met, and he was like, hey, why don't you teach a workshop for us? And I was like, okay, fine. Like, about what? Because I was doing marketing stuff over here, and he's like, storytelling. And he just said it like so matter of factly. He didn't even ask. He just said storytelling. And I was like, okay, and so I started putting together content, and then I delivered the workshop, and it was super successful, and I enjoyed it. And I was like, oh, like this could be a thing. And then I just started working on it from there. And that eventually morphed into presentation skills training and communication skills. I just find that it's a nice marriage of like the theater and performance and the stage presence stuff with the communication skills and like more analytical side of language and I don't know, literature or like writing kind of skills. So that's how I got into it. And I love it. I love it.
So cool. I had a question at the top of this document of questions for this session, and I haven't asked it yet. And so maybe I'll ask the first question last.
Okay.
And that is, what is presenting?
I think presenting is taking a chance on connection. It's being willing to share something that's inside with outside, with other, right? So it's like, I'm over here, you're over there. There's this thing that I want to use as a vehicle for connection. And I mean, obviously, this is the way I see it.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that connection is the goal of presenting.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people wouldn't agree with me, but it's kind of like that old saying, like, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Presenting is an opportunity for self-actualization. Presenting is an opportunity for you to iterate your thoughts and your experience and make it meaningful, not only for yourself, but for other people as well.
Yeah.
Because if you keep it all inside all the time, then it's not really serving you. It's just mental chatter, and it's not serving anyone else, because we are here to learn from each other. But the only way we can learn from each other is if other people present what's going on inside of them. So it's incredibly meaningful as a species. I mean, think about it, like the cave paintings, storytelling. These are all presentations as well. Hey, I'm going to present this image I have in my mind of this bison falling off a cliff. What do you think? Like, that's also presenting. And we've been doing it since the dawn of time. Why? Because keeping things inside, it's a little lonely. It's lonely, but it's also not productive. Have you read the book Ishi the Last Yahi?
No. Who and what's Yahi and who's Ishi? And it calls up many questions, but no, I have not read that book. Tell me why you're mentioning it.
It's a beautiful book. So Dan Kroeber was an anthropologist that lived in San Francisco at the turn of the 18th century. And he one day was out in Oroville, California on, I don't know, it might've been a holiday, like hunting or something like that. And who does he run into but this guy named Ishi? Who is Ishi? Ishi was a Yahi Native American who was living in the wilderness around Oroville for many years. He and his tribe had lived out there for many, many years, since the dawn of time, probably. And why did Ishi walk into Oroville one day and happen to meet Dan Kroeber? Because Ishi was tired of living alone, because all of his family and all of his friends had died. And he was literally living alone in the forest, I think for many years, by the time he decided like I would rather be killed. Like the chances of being killed are less horrible to me than the chances of living the rest of my life alone. And so he walked out and happened to meet, the first person he met was this really kind anthropologist, Dan Krober. And that was the beginning of this beautiful friendship. And Dan and Ishi like went back to San Francisco together, and Ishi lived the rest of his life, and he worked like at the anthropology museum or something. Like it's this beautiful, beautiful true story. And it's kind of the same idea. Like Ishi didn't want to live alone. He didn't want to not have an audience.
Right.
Like that the promise of never having an audience again was terrifying to him. And so he risked his life to have an audience, to share himself with other people, and to be in the audience for others. And I see it the same way. Again, it goes back to this idea of connection. Like we're all looking for connection. It's a human primal need. And presenting, sure, it's, you know, in our culture has been mutated over time and refined, and now we think about it in certain ways, but really at the end of the day, it's connection, it's connecting with people.
Cool. That's great, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Thank you.